Hello, and welcome back to Velvet Haunt. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy chilling tales that linger in the velvet dark, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1, my wife and I have been married for exactly 1 year. Today is actually our anniversary. I am 26, and Vivian is 28. For most of our relationship, I believed I understood her better than anyone else in the world. We had always been close, honest, and comfortable with each other. We could talk for hours about almost anything, even things that did not really matter. That is why the way she has been acting recently has frightened me so much. I am not sure where to begin, so I will start with the first time I noticed something was wrong. It happened about 2 months ago, the morning after a date night. We had gone to a nice restaurant to celebrate Vivian's promotion. She had recently become a senior analyst at her office, and I was incredibly proud of her. I used some money I had saved from my job to pay for dinner. The restaurant was more expensive than the places we usually visited, but I thought she deserved something special. The night itself was wonderful. We ate too much, drank too much, and stayed out later than we had planned. Vivian laughed through most of the evening. She kept making jokes about how she was finally becoming a serious adult, even though she had already been the more responsible person in our relationship for years. Nothing strange happened that night. The strange part began the following morning. Before I explain it, I should mention that our Apple Health apps are connected. We originally linked them because we were both trying to exercise more, and it made it easier to encourage each other. We could see basic health updates, activity goals, sleep information, and cycle tracking. When I woke up that Saturday morning, Vivian was already in the kitchen making breakfast. Neither of us had work, but I had a terrible hangover. My head felt like someone had packed it with wet cement. My mouth was dry, my stomach was unsettled, and the sunlight coming through the bedroom curtains felt painfully bright. I reached for my glasses and put them on. Then I checked my phone and saw that I had forgotten to charge it. The battery was almost dead. Just before the screen went black, a notification appeared from the health app. It said Vivian had started her period. That was not unusual, and I did not think much about it. I plugged my phone into the charger and slowly walked out of the bedroom. Our apartment is small. The bedroom opens into a short hallway, with the bathroom and closet nearby. The hallway leads directly into the living room and kitchen. The stove is built into a section of countertop facing the living area. It sits where a dishwasher would normally be, which means whoever is cooking can look across the counter toward the sofa, the dining table, and the hallway. We had always liked the layout. It made it easier to talk while one of us cooked. That morning, Vivian was standing at the stove, moving something around in her cast iron pan. I think it was bacon, although it might have been waffle batter. My memory of the food is unclear. What I remember perfectly is her face. She was staring directly at me. It was not a loving look. It was not playful, angry, or even curious. There was no clear emotion behind it at all. She was simply watching me. Her hand continued moving the food around the pan, but her eyes stayed fixed on my face. I stopped in the hallway. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I thought maybe I was misunderstanding her expression because of the hangover. My eyes were still adjusting, and my head was pounding. I also wondered whether I had said something embarrassing or hurtful, while drunk the night before. I walked to the dining table and sat down. When I looked at her again, Vivian was smiling. She hummed quietly to herself and flipped whatever she was cooking. She looked completely normal. At the time, I convinced myself I had imagined the stare. Looking back, I believe that was the first episode. The second one happened a few days later. That was also the day I learned I was losing my job. I worked as a remote technical support specialist for a large computer reseller. It was not my dream career, but I had been doing it for 5 years. I was good at it, and I liked the security of having a regular schedule and steady income. The company told me that my position was being removed because business was struggling. They insisted it had nothing to do with my performance. I was given a few final days before my employment officially ended, but emotionally, it felt as though my career had disappeared the moment I received the message. I did not tell Vivian immediately. I was ashamed. I knew losing a job was not a personal failure, especially when the company was cutting multiple positions, but I still felt useless. Vivian had just received a promotion, while I was about to become unemployed. I worried she would see me differently, even though she had never given me a reason to believe that. That evening, she came home from work and asked me to look at her desktop computer. It had been having several problems recently. Each time I repaired one issue, something new seemed to appear. That night, the computer kept failing to start properly. Vivian and I had recently begun playing a few casual games together after work. Neither of us was a serious gamer, but it gave us a way to relax. I wanted to get the computer working again so we could play something and take our minds off the day. I tried the usual steps. I checked the cables, tested the power, removed unnecessary devices, and attempted to enter the BIOS. Vivian sat nearby and watched me. She had one leg folded over the other, and her hands resting calmly in her lap. After about 2 hours, I was becoming frustrated. Nothing I tried seemed to work. I leaned back from the computer and looked at Vivian. She had the same expression I had seen in the kitchen. Her face looked almost normal at first. Her mouth was closed, her lips forming a thin, relaxed line. Her eyelids were slightly lowered as though she was tired. But she was staring directly through me. The longer I looked at her, the more unnatural it seemed. It was not simply that she was quiet. Vivian could sit quietly when she wanted to. This was different. Her face looked empty, like someone had paused her in the middle of being alive. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I asked. She did not answer. I waited a few seconds, thinking she had not heard me. "Viv?" Still nothing. I turned back to the computer, although I could feel her eyes on me. A few minutes later, I looked over my shoulder again. She had not moved. Her eyes were still aimed at me, and her expression had not changed at all. I asked her again what she was doing. She gave me no response. By then, I was uncomfortable, but I did not know what else to do. I turned back toward the computer and kept working. It took nearly 5 hours before I finally managed to get the desktop running. By then, it was too late for us to play anything. Vivian had worked the next morning, and I was facing unemployment for the first time in my adult life. I was still looking at the computer screen when I heard her voice behind me. "You got it working. Thanks, lovey." I turned around. Vivian was walking into the bedroom from the bathroom. I stared at her. I had never heard her stand up. I had never heard her walk away from the chair. I had not heard the bathroom door open or close. I asked her why she had been acting so strangely. She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "That face you were making," I said. You were staring at me. What face? Her confusion appeared genuine, but I assumed she was playing a joke. Vivian loved harmless pranks. Usually they were silly things, like hiding plastic insects in my shoes or changing my phone wallpaper to an embarrassing picture of herself. Her jokes never lasted more than a day or two. I thought this was another one. Between those episodes, Vivian behaved normally. She went to work, came home, and told me about her day. We talked about her office, our friends, social media, television, and whatever else came to mind. Talking had always been the foundation of our relationship. At work, Vivian was serious and professional. At home, she was almost the opposite. She was playful, energetic, and easily excited. The best comparison I can make is a calmer version of Pinkie Pie from My Little Pony. Vivian was not childish, but she had the same kind of cheerful energy. She laughed loudly, loved surprises, and could barely hide her excitement when she had good news. She was also terrible at lying. Even when she tried to surprise me with a gift, I always knew she was hiding something. She would walk carefully, as though every step might expose her secret, and there would be a trapped giggle behind her eyes. That was why I believed her when she said she did not know what I was talking about. A few days later, I finally told her about losing my job. She took the news better than I expected. She hugged me, told me we would be okay with her income for a while, and reminded me that being laid off was not my fault. Then, she made me promise to keep the apartment clean while she was at work. She was teasing, but I took the promise seriously. It was the least I could do while searching for another job. For a short time, things seemed manageable. Then the staring became more frequent. About a month ago, I began catching her with that empty expression almost every day. Sometimes it happened in the morning while she was getting ready. Sometimes it happened at night while we were watching television. She would suddenly stop whatever she was doing and stare at me. She did not blink often. She did not speak. She did not react when I said her name. The episodes could last several minutes. At first, I kept asking her about them. Every time she returned to normal, she claimed she had no idea what I meant. Eventually, I stopped asking. I told myself it was still a prank. It was not funny, but it seemed easier to believe that than to consider the alternatives. Then one morning, she disappeared. Vivian was supposed to be getting ready for work. I had been in the living room checking job listings while she moved around the bedroom. At some point, I realized the apartment had become completely quiet. I called her name. There was no answer. I checked the bathroom. It was empty. I checked the bedroom. She was not there. I looked in the kitchen, although there was nowhere for her to hide. Then I checked the small balcony. Still nothing. We keep an AirTag inside our car in case it is ever stolen. I checked its location and saw that the car was still in the parking garage. Vivian's phone was also still inside the apartment. I became genuinely frightened. Our apartment is not large enough for a person to disappear inside it. I started calling her name more loudly and opening every cupboard and door. For a moment, I wondered whether this was another joke. Maybe she was hiding somewhere and planning to jump out at me. It felt childish, but it was the only explanation that made sense. After searching the apartment again, I decided to call the police. I reached for my phone, but my hand knocked it from the dresser. It hit the floor with a sharp sound. I bent down, hoping I had not cracked the screen. That was when I saw her. She was inside our closet. The closet has black wire racks where we hang our clothes. Vivian was lying on top of one of those racks, pressed into the narrow space between the shelf and the ceiling. I still do not understand how she fit there. Later, I measured the space. It was only a little more than 30 centimeters high. Vivian should not have been able to place her entire body inside it, especially while lying flat. But there she was. Her face was turned toward me. Her eyes were wide and locked onto mine. Her mouth was stretched into a delighted smile. She was giggling. It was not her usual laugh. This sound was thin, high, and wet, as though her mouth was full of saliva. The giggle was so quiet that I could barely hear it, but it continued without pause. "Viv, what the fuck are you doing?" I asked. She did not move. "Get down from there. You're going to be late. This isn't funny." Her body remained completely still. Only the faint giggling continued. I became angry because fear was turning into frustration. "Look, I can call your boss and say you need the day off. Just stop pretending to be a spider and talk to me." Nothing. I muttered something about her being a weirdo and walked toward the dresser to get her phone. She always left it there at night because she did not want to be tempted to use it in bed. The phone was exactly where I expected. I picked it up and turned toward the closet. Vivian was gone. I froze. The wire rack was empty. I looked around the bedroom, and then I saw her standing beside our bed, pulling on her cardigan. She looked sleepy and completely normal. Finally, I said, "Why were you doing that?" That was seriously weird. She pushed one arm through her sleeve and tilted her head. "Katie, what are you talking about?" By that point, I was furious. "In the closet, Vivian, you were lying on the wire rack like some kind of spider. How did you even fit up there?" She blinked slowly. "Babe, I just woke up. Please, calm down." Her voice sounded tired, as if she truly had just gotten out of bed. For a moment, I wondered whether I had overreacted. Maybe the stress of losing my job was affecting me more than I realized. I took a deep breath and forced myself to calm down. Vivian left for work, but I made her promise we would discuss it that night. We never did. Her boss kept her at the office late. Then, traffic delayed her for more than an hour. Road workers were repairing a pothole near the entrance to our parking garage, which caused another delay. By the time Vivian returned home, it was nearly midnight, and I had fallen asleep. During the following days, the closet incident happened again. Then, it happened again after that. Sometimes I would enter the bedroom and find her lying above the clothes, squeezed into that impossible space. She would stare at me and giggle until I looked away. Whenever I turned my attention somewhere else, she vanished. A few seconds later, she would appear in another part of the apartment, behaving normally and claiming she had no memory of what I had seen. I stopped confronting her. Part of me thought she might be dealing with something she could not explain. Maybe she was under too much pressure at work. Maybe the promotion had brought more stress than she admitted. I tried to be patient. Then she started hiding under the bed. The first time it happened, I was folding laundry. One of my socks fell to the floor and rolled beneath the bed. I crouched down to reach for it. Vivian was lying underneath. Our bed sits low to the floor. There is only enough space for storage boxes and a few pairs of shoes. Somehow, her body was stretched flat beneath it. Her face was turned sideways, pressed against the floor. She stared directly at me. Then she began to giggle. I screamed and jumped backward. Vivian did not react. I shouted her name. I demanded that she stop. I told her she was frightening me. She only continued staring. That was when I reached my breaking point. I yelled at her for several minutes. I called the behavior cruel and disgusting. I asked why she would keep doing something that clearly terrified me. Nothing changed. She just kept giggling. Eventually, I stormed out of the apartment. I walked to a nearby coffee shop and sat alone for several hours, trying to understand what was happening. I searched online for explanations. I read about dissociation, sleepwalking, psychotic episodes, trauma responses, neurological problems, and dissociative identity disorder. I knew internet searches could not diagnose anyone, but I became convinced that Vivian needed professional help. Even if the behavior was related to sleepwalking, it was dangerous. She could fall from the closet rack or injure herself while climbing into places where her body should not fit. I returned home at around 8 that evening. Vivian had called me once. She had not left a voicemail. She had also sent a text. Did you go out? Be safe. Love you. When I entered the apartment, she was completely herself again. She kissed me, hugged me, and asked where I had been. Her concern seemed honest. I told her we needed help. I made her schedule an appointment with a psychiatrist. At first, Vivian resisted. She said I was stressed and probably imagining things. She reminded me that I had recently lost my job and that my sleep had become irregular. But I was desperate. I begged her to attend the appointment. Eventually, she agreed, but only if I attended with her. I felt relieved. I made dinner that night because I wanted to apologize for shouting earlier, even though Vivian claimed she had no memory of it. The episodes continued while we waited for the appointment. The staring happened every day. The closet and bed incidents became part of our normal routine. One Sunday, I decided to time them. The staring episodes lasted a total of 32 minutes that day. The closet episode lasted 25 minutes. Vivian remained under the bed for 2 hours and 16 minutes. Each episode ended only when I stopped speaking to her and looked away. Strangely, the behavior became almost ordinary. It still frightened me, but I began to accept it as part of my daily life. I stopped screaming when I found her in the closet. I stopped trying to pull her out from beneath the bed. I simply waited until it ended. I began recording the date and duration of every episode. I used notes and spreadsheets to track patterns. Some of the earlier information was based on memory, but later entries included exact times. A clear pattern started forming. There appeared to be several phases. Before a new behavior began, the previous behavior increased in frequency. The staring became more common before the closet incidents began. The closet incidents increased before she started hiding under the bed. I printed the information before our appointment. The psychiatrist asked us about our families, our jobs, our relationship, and our daily habits. Vivian answered normally. She was charming, calm, and thoughtful. When the conversation reached her strange behavior, I handed him my notes and graphs. I explained that some early dates were estimates, but the recent data was accurate. To my relief, he did not dismiss me. He studied the information carefully and asked several questions. He did not prescribe medication for either of us, which made me feel better because one of my biggest fears was that someone would receive the wrong treatment. Instead, he suggested installing cameras throughout the apartment. He wanted video evidence of the episodes. He scheduled another appointment for exactly 1 week later and asked us to bring any useful recordings. Installing security cameras made me deeply uncomfortable. Our apartment was small, and placing cameras in nearly every room felt like destroying the little privacy we had. I also hated drilling holes into the drywall because repairing them would cost money. Still, we followed the doctor's advice. Vivian helped me set everything up. She remained cheerful and supportive while I connected the cameras to the Wi-Fi and installed the monitoring app on our phones. Over the next several days, the episodes continued. I documented each one with exact timestamps so I could easily locate it in the footage. I was proud of how organized I had become. After losing my job, I had felt useless. Tracking the incidents gave me something important to do. At the same time, it hurt to think my wife might be experiencing a serious mental health crisis. The second appointment arrived the following week. I was nervous, but I also felt a small amount of excitement. I was finally going to prove that I had not imagined anything. Vivian would see herself staring, hiding in the closet, and lying beneath the bed. Then we could begin finding a solution. My confidence disappeared when I played the recordings. There was nothing unusual in them. During the times I had marked, Vivian was sitting on the sofa, sleeping in bed, getting dressed, or moving normally through the apartment. There were no staring episodes. She never entered the closet. She was never beneath the bed. The footage showed nothing. My heart sank. I started crying in the psychiatrist's office. "I'm not crazy," I whispered. "I'm not crazy." I repeated it several times until I no longer had the energy to speak. The doctor still did not prescribe medication. He said there was not enough evidence to make a clear diagnosis. He advised us to communicate more openly and return for regular sessions. I did not blame him. The video evidence was clear. One of us had a problem, and it looked as though that person was me. After the appointment, I felt numb. I felt as if I were slowly losing the woman I loved, but I also could not trust my own eyes. Whenever Vivian was at work, I searched through my records for another explanation. Vivian was the real expert in data analysis, but I was willing to work with what I had. Eventually, I found two possible connections. The first was her menstrual cycle. Every time the health app reported that her period had started, a new phase of behavior seemed to begin. The first stare happened when her cycle began. Later phases also appeared close to new cycle entries. The troubling part was that Vivian seemed to be recording periods far more often than normal. At first, I assumed the app was wrong. Maybe she had accidentally entered incorrect dates. The second connection was my job. The strange behavior began on the same day I was informed that I would be laid off. I had not lied earlier. My official final day came later. But the first episode occurred on the morning of the day I received the termination notice. I did not understand how those two things could be related. A few days before our second psychiatric appointment, Vivian's period had supposedly started and ended again. I had not noticed the new behavior, so I wondered whether the cycle connection was only a coincidence. Then I started questioning everything. What if a new phase had begun and I had simply failed to recognize it? What if she had found another way to watch me? What if something at her workplace was causing this? The questions spun through my head while I moved between the health app and the camera app. The camera app opened to a timestamp from several days earlier. I had not marked that time in my notes. I assumed I had accidentally stopped there while preparing footage for the psychiatrist. But by then, I was so paranoid that even a small mistake felt suspicious. I began thinking about impossible explanations. Ghosts, possession, someone pretending to be Vivian, something controlling the cameras. I knew how unreasonable it sounded, but I was close to losing my mind. The frozen image on my phone showed our empty living room. I stared at it for several seconds, searching for anything unusual. Then I pressed play. At first, nothing happened. The camera slowly moved across the living room toward the hallway. I had muted my phone, but the apartment appeared empty, so I did not expect to hear anything. Then I noticed the bathroom door. It was open. Most people probably would not find that unusual, but Vivian and I always kept interior doors closed. We both disliked seeing dark, empty rooms through open doorways. The bathroom door was only open a few centimeters. I used the zoom control. My stomach turned. Vivian was standing behind the door. Most of her body was hidden by darkness, but I could see her eyes clearly. They were normal eyes. They were not red or glowing. The whites were visible, and a small reflection from the kitchen light shone in her irises. She was staring directly into the camera. Then I saw myself enter the recording. I was eating a jam and hazelnut spread sandwich while typing on my phone. I walked through the living room and toward the bedroom. My cheeks were full because I had taken a huge bite. Vivian did not look at me. Her eyes remained fixed on the camera. I had walked directly past her without noticing. A cold hand touched my shoulder. I screamed. "Kate?" It was Vivian. "Fuck, you scared me," I said, struggling to breathe. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." She looked tired and pale. "Don't stay up all night, okay? I'm feeling sick, so I'm going to bed early. I love you." I wasn't going to kiss you because you seemed upset earlier when I almost started crying. I thought everything was my fault. I believed I was hallucinating. Maybe the image on the camera did not exist at all. I grabbed Vivian's hand and turned the phone toward her. "What am I looking at?" I pointed at the bathroom door. "What about it?" she asked. "It's open." "The bathroom door is open." I expected her to become frightened. Instead, she gently removed my hand from her wrist and lowered her voice, as though speaking to a frightened child. "Honey, there's nothing there." "The door is closed." I looked at the footage. She was right. The recording had continued playing, so I moved it backward to the moment I had walked through the hallway. Everything looked almost the same, but now the bathroom door was closed. Vivian was not standing behind it. The video showed her inside the bedroom. I remembered that version of events. She had been in the bedroom and had teased me about my sandwich making my cheeks look like a chipmunk's. I did not know what was wrong with me. "Come to bed with me?" Vivian asked. I shook my head. I felt beyond crazy. I felt like I needed to be locked inside a hospital room where I could not hurt myself or anyone else. "Then I won't go either," she said. "I'll stay here with you." She sat beside me on the sofa and wrapped her warm arms around my body. For some reason, I suddenly noticed how thin I felt. My arms seemed smaller than before. My ribs felt more noticeable beneath my shirt. Had I lost weight? Maybe I was imagining that too. Vivian kept her promise. She held me throughout the night. I fell asleep in her arms and woke up in the same position. She did not stare at me. I checked the cameras to make sure. The recording showed her holding me and whispering quietly into my ear. It should have been comforting. It reminded me of my childhood, when my stepmother would hold my brother and me after we woke from nightmares. That happened last week. Since then, nothing new has happened. I need to be careful with how I say that. Vivian is still doing the strange things. She still stares. I still find her in the closet and beneath the bed, but there have been no new phases, at least none that I can remember. There are now large gaps in my memory. I know entire days have passed. I can see the dates on my phone. I can find messages I sent and meals I apparently prepared, but I cannot remember living through those days. Sometimes, I only remember after watching the camera footage. I have become obsessed with the recordings. Vivian says it is unhealthy. She tells me she only wants me to be happy, but I cannot stop watching. The cameras show her watching me. I see her behind the bathroom door. I see her beneath the bed. I see her inside the closet. Whenever I watch her through the cameras, she stares directly into the lens. Whenever I see her in person, she stares directly at me. I know it is frightening. I know none of this is normal. But I am exhausted. This has been happening for almost 2 months, and I no longer have enough energy to panic every time. I want my wife back. I want the real Vivian. I want the woman who laughs too loudly, hides stupid gifts, and cannot keep a secret for more than 5 minutes. I do not want this quiet thing that looks like her and watches me from dark places. I only get my real wife for about 1 hour each day now. It always happens shortly before bed. For that hour, she talks to me normally. She smiles, makes jokes, asks about my day, and tells me about work. Then the hour ends. After that, she begins watching again. I know I have a problem. Maybe Vivian needs help. Maybe I need help. Writing everything down has given me a little more perspective, but not enough to understand what is happening. I cannot tell which memories are real anymore. I cannot trust the cameras because the footage changes. I cannot trust Vivian because she claims she remembers nothing. And I cannot trust myself because entire days are disappearing from my mind. Today is our anniversary. Vivian is at work right now. At least I think she is. Her car is not in the garage, and her phone's location shows her office. But one of the cameras has been sending motion alerts from the bedroom for the last 20 minutes. I have not opened the footage yet. I am afraid of what I will see. I am also afraid I will see nothing. So now that you know the entire story, please tell me what I am supposed to do. Story 2. Things were never the same after that Tuesday in the fall. I remember that day more clearly than I remember most of my life. I remember the cold light outside, the brown leaves collecting along the sidewalks, and the smell of rain hanging in the air. I remember what I was wearing, what time I left work, and the exact sound my phone made when the police called me. It is strange how the mind works. It lets peaceful years fade into a soft blur, but it keeps every detail of the moment that destroys you. Happiness becomes a collection of half-remembered pictures. Pain remains sharp, bright, and impossible to escape. But before that Tuesday, before our lives were broken into pieces that no longer fit together, there was us. We met in high school. There was nothing dramatic about it. There was no love at first sight, no sudden music, and no perfect moment when the rest of the world disappeared. We were simply paired together for a class project neither of us cared about. I had planned to do as little work as possible. She had apparently made the same decision. Our first conversation was about which one of us would have to speak during the presentation. I told her I hated standing in front of people. She told me she hated working with lazy partners. I said that made us even because I hated working with rude ones. She stared at me for a moment, trying to remain serious, but then she laughed. That laugh stayed with me. She always laughed in 2 stages. First came the real laugh, sudden and bright. Then she would cover her mouth and try to make it smaller, as if she was embarrassed that anyone had heard it. I started making stupid jokes. just to watch it happen. We began meeting after school to work on the project. At least, that was what we told ourselves. Most of the time, we sat in the library talking about everything except the assignment. I learned that she hated thunderstorms but loved the smell after rain. She learned that I pretended not to care about many things because caring made me feel exposed. I learned she wanted to travel, even though she had never been outside the state. She learned I wanted a quiet life, though I was too embarrassed to admit it. We did not fall in love all at once. It happened slowly. It happened through long conversations, shared lunches, awkward silences, and phone calls that continued long after we had run out of things to say. It happened when she saved me a seat without asking. It happened when I walked her home, even though it added 40 minutes to my journey. It happened quietly, the way things that last often do. By the end of high school, I could no longer imagine my future without her in it. I knew I wanted a real life with her, not an exciting life or a perfect one. I wanted a small house, a warm kitchen, and someone waiting for me at the end of the day. I wanted arguments about bills, weekend grocery trips, and old photographs covering the walls. Most of all, I wanted children. She did too. We talked about them before we were even married. She wanted 2. I wanted 3. We argued over names, though there were no babies to give them to. She said I would be too soft as a father. I said she would be the one secretly allowing them to eat dessert before dinner. Back then, parenthood felt certain. It was not a question of whether it would happen. It was only a question of when. We married in our mid-20s. The ceremony was small because we could not afford anything larger, but neither of us cared. She wore a simple white dress. I forgot half the words I had prepared because my hands would not stop shaking. For the first few years, we were happy. Not perfect, but happy. We rented a small apartment above a laundromat. The pipes made terrible noises. The heat barely worked, and the bedroom window would not close properly. Still, we loved it because it was ours. Eventually, we saved enough for a house. It was not large, but it had 3 bedrooms. One for us, one that became my office, and one we left empty. That empty room was meant for our child. At first, we did not worry when she did not become pregnant. People told us it often took time. We were still young. There was no reason to panic. Months passed. Then a year. Then another. We tried everything people suggested. We changed diets, followed schedules, visited doctors, and filled drawers with medicine. We learned words and medical terms we had never wanted to know. Every month began with hope and ended with disappointment. She would sit on the edge of the bathtub holding another negative test while I stood outside the door, waiting for her to speak. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she became silent. The silent days were worse. I never knew what to say. I wanted to promise her it would happen, but promises felt cruel when I had no control over the truth. The years continued passing. Our friends started having children. At first, we attended every baby shower and birthday party. We smiled, brought gifts, and told everyone how happy we were for them. And we were happy for them. That was the painful part. We were happy for them, but every celebration reminded us of what we did not have. On the drive home, she would look out the passenger window and remain quiet. I would keep both hands on the steering wheel and pretend not to notice her wiping tears from her face. Eventually, we stopped accepting invitations. There were moments when we barely spoke to each other, not because we no longer loved each other, but because every conversation felt dangerous. Blame entered our home quietly. It did not arrive through screaming or cruelty. It appeared in small comments and long silences. It appeared when one of us forgot an appointment or questioned another treatment. It appeared when I worked late because I did not want to face the empty room. It appeared when she asked if I still wanted her, and I did not understand that she was really asking whether I blamed her. I blamed myself instead. I wondered whether she would have been happier with someone else. Someone who could have given her the family she wanted. Someone who would not freeze every time she cried. There were nights when we slept facing opposite walls, both awake and pretending not to be. Still, we stayed. We always stayed, no matter how hard things became. She was still the person I wanted beside me when the anger passed. She was the person I wanted to see when I woke up. She was the only person who knew every part of me and had chosen to remain. Then, one morning, everything changed. I found her standing in the bathroom, staring down at something in her hand. At first, I thought she was sick. Her face had gone pale, and her whole body was trembling. When I asked what was wrong, she looked at me but could not speak. Then she held out the pregnancy test. There were 2 lines. I remember staring at them without understanding. We had seen so many single lines that my mind refused to accept anything else. "Is it real?" I asked. She began to cry. I had seen her cry from pain, frustration, and exhaustion. I had held her after failed treatments and listened to her sob into her pillow. But I had never seen her cry like that. Those tears came from somewhere pure. I wrapped my arms around her, and she pressed her face against my chest. We stood in that bathroom for a long time, holding each other and laughing through our tears. I thought we had finally reached the other side of our suffering. I thought everything was going to be right. I did not know how naive I was. The break-in happened on a Tuesday. I was not home. That is the part that has never left me. I was not there to protect her. I had gone to work early that morning. She had been feeling tired, so she stayed home. Before leaving, I kissed her forehead and told her to call me if she needed anything. She smiled and said she would be fine. Those were the last normal words we ever shared. Around noon, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. A police officer asked me to confirm my name and address. His voice was controlled, careful, and distant. It was the voice people use when they have terrible news, but do not want to say it too quickly. He told me there had been an incident at my home. I do not remember leaving work. I do not remember getting into my car or driving through traffic. I only remember the police vehicles outside our house and the yellow tape across the front yard. I remember an officer stepping in front of me when I tried to run inside. I remember shouting her name. The front door had been forced open. The living room had been torn apart. Drawers had been emptied onto the floor, and broken glass covered the carpet. But the damage to the house meant nothing. She was alive, but something precious had been taken from us. The baby was gone. The doctors tried to explain it in gentle medical language. They spoke about shock, injuries, stress, and complications. Their words became meaningless noise. All I understood was that we had waited for years, finally received what we wanted, and then someone had entered our home and destroyed it. The police told me to remain calm. They told me they would handle everything. I did not want them to handle it. I wanted to find the man myself. There is a movie about a man hunting down the people who took everything from him. The revenge in that movie is slow, brutal, and personal. For several days, I understood that man more than I should have. I started searching. I spoke to neighbors. I drove through nearby streets and looked for security cameras. I visited pawn shops and asked whether anyone had tried to sell our belongings. I barely slept. I carried a heavy metal tool under the driver's seat. I told myself it was for protection. That was a lie. I did not have a plan for what I would do if I found him. I only knew I wanted him to feel afraid before he died. The police found him first. He had broken into several houses in the area. They found some of our stolen property in his apartment, along with clothing stained with blood. He was arrested, processed, and eventually sentenced to years in prison. People acted as if that should have brought relief. It did not. A courtroom could not return what we had lost. A prison sentence could not erase what had happened inside our home. The man was gone, but the damage remained. After the attack, something in my wife changed. It did not happen loudly. She did not scream or break things. She did not talk about revenge. She did not even speak about the baby very often. Instead, she became distant from herself. She moved through the house like someone following instructions she could not hear. She ate when I placed food in front of her. She slept when her body could no longer stay awake. Sometimes I would find her standing in the empty bedroom, staring at the bare wall. We had already begun preparing the room before the break-in. There were paint samples on the floor and a small wooden crib still sealed inside its box. I asked her whether she wanted me to remove everything. She said no. So the room remained untouched. At night, I sometimes heard her crying behind its closed door. I told myself it was grief. I told myself grief had no proper shape. It could make people angry, quiet, restless, or numb. I believed time would slowly bring her back to me. All I had to do was remain close. All I had to do was take care of her. After what happened, I no longer trusted the world. I installed cameras around the house. At first, they were only outside. I placed one above the front door, another near the garage, and two facing the backyard. Every entrance, window, and blind spot was covered. Then I added more. I installed cameras inside the hallway, the living room, and the kitchen. I told myself it was still about protection. If anyone entered the house again, I wanted to see them before they reached her. Eventually, I installed a camera in the bedroom. Not because I did not trust her. I trusted her more than anyone. I simply did not trust the world anymore. That was when I began noticing things. She started leaving the bed at night. Not every night. At first, it happened only once or twice a week. She would sit upright slowly, turn her head toward my side of the bed, and watch me for several seconds. Then she would lower her feet to the floor and stand. Her movements were quiet and careful. She acted as if she did not want to wake me. I assumed she was sleepwalking. Trauma does strange things to people. At least that was what I told myself. Sometimes she walked into the empty bedroom and stayed there until morning. Other times she moved around the house without turning on the lights. When I asked about it, she said she did not remember leaving the bed. I believed her. Then I heard the sound. It woke me in the middle of the night. At first, I thought it was raining. I lay still, listening to a soft, rhythmic noise somewhere in the room. It was wet, slow, almost familiar. It sounded like someone drinking from a bottle, pulling the final drops through a narrow opening. It reminded me of a child sucking the last melted liquid from an ice pop. I sat up and stared into the darkness. The sound continued. Steady, deliberate. I looked beside me. She was not in bed. The noise seemed to be coming from below. I switched on the lamp. The sound stopped immediately. She was standing near the bathroom door. "What are you doing?" I asked. She looked confused. "I needed water," she said. There was no glass in her hand. I wanted to ask more, but her face looked peaceful for the first time in weeks. So I let it go. The next morning, I checked the camera recording. I watched her rise from the bed at 2:14 a.m. She stood still for nearly a minute, listening to something I could not hear. Then she walked around to my side of the bed. She knelt on the floor. At first, I thought she was looking for something. Then she lowered herself onto her stomach. Slowly, she slid beneath the bed. The camera could not see her after that. For almost 20 minutes, nothing moved. Then she came back out. She sat on the floor with her back against the bed, breathing deeply. Her eyes were closed, and there was a faint smile on her face. It was not happiness. It was something else. She looked fulfilled. She looked like someone who had finally satisfied a terrible hunger. I should have asked her what she was doing. I should have looked beneath the bed. I should have stopped everything right then. But I did not. Her calmness frightened me, but it also gave me hope. I had not seen her look peaceful since the attack. I convinced myself it was some strange way of dealing with grief. Maybe she crawled beneath the bed because the small space made her feel safe. Maybe it reminded her of hiding as a child. Maybe her mind had created a private place where nothing could reach her. People do strange things when they are broken. I gave her privacy. Then she began getting weaker. At first, I thought the trauma was finally catching up with her. She slept later each day. She stopped going outside. She could barely finish a meal. Her clothes became loose. Her face grew thin, and her skin became extremely pale. Dark shadows formed beneath her eyes, and sometimes her hands shook so badly that she could not hold a cup. I begged her to eat. She tried. She would take a few bites, chew slowly, and then say she felt sick. Some days I came home and found her unconscious. The first time, she was lying on the kitchen floor with a broken plate beside her. I saw it happen through the camera while I was at work. One moment, she was standing at the counter. The next, her knees folded beneath her. I left work without speaking to anyone. When I reached the house, she was awake but confused. She could not remember falling. Another time, she collapsed in the living room. I thought I was losing her. It felt as though life had not hurt us enough. It had taken our child, and now it wanted her too. We visited doctors, specialists, nutritionists, and therapists. They took blood, performed scans, asked questions, and gave us instructions. Nothing explained her condition. Her blood levels were unusual, but not in a way any doctor could clearly understand. She was losing strength faster than poor eating alone could explain. I learned how to cook healthier meals. I measured every ingredient. I bought vitamins, powders, and supplements. I kept notebooks filled with what she ate and how long she slept. I stayed home from work whenever I could. I watched over her. I took care of her. I loved her in the only way I knew how. Nothing changed. She continued fading. At night, she still went beneath the bed. Sometimes I heard the wet rhythm while pretending to sleep. I wanted to look. But each time I thought about getting up, a heavy feeling came over my body. It was as if the air had become thick and deep. My arms would feel distant, and my thoughts would become slow. I would lie frozen, listening until the sound stopped. By morning, I would almost convince myself it had been a dream. The night everything finally made sense, I fell asleep in my office. I had been watching old camera recordings, searching for something I might have missed. The monitor showed the bedroom, the living room, and the empty nursery. At some point, my eyes closed. I do not know how long I slept. I woke suddenly. There had been no loud noise. Nothing had touched me. Still, every part of my body knew something was happening. That heavy feeling had returned. The room seemed filled with pressure. My limbs felt numb, as if they belonged to someone else. I looked at the monitor. The bedroom was empty. The blankets had been pulled back, and the door stood open. I already knew where she was. I forced myself out of the chair. The house was completely silent as I walked down the hallway. Each step felt slow and difficult, like I was moving through deep water. Then I heard the sound. The wet, hollow rhythm. It was louder than before. Clearer, it came from the empty bedroom. The door was almost closed. A narrow line of darkness showed between the door and the frame. I placed my hand against it and pushed. At first, I could not understand what I was seeing. She was kneeling in the middle of the floor. Her back was turned toward me. Something moved in her arms. She held it carefully against her chest. Her hand supported its body with the same gentleness she would have used to hold a newborn baby. The creature was small, but not small enough. Its shape was wrong in every way my mind could understand. It had too many limbs. Some were thin and long, folded against its body like the legs of an insect. Others were smaller, soft, and unfinished. They twitched without control. Its skin was pale and almost transparent. Dark lines moved beneath the surface, carrying something through its body. Its head had no clear shape. There were smooth areas where eyes should have been, and a narrow opening that opened and closed as it breathed. The creature's body pulsed faintly, as if it did not fully understand how to exist. A long, thin feeding tube extended from its mouth. The tube was buried in the side of my wife's neck. With each soft, sucking sound, her body trembled. That was what I had been hearing at night. It had been feeding on her, drawing from her, taking her strength one slow mouthful at a time. I should have screamed. I should have pulled it away from her. I should have killed it. Instead, I stood in the doorway. She was not fighting it. She was comforting it. One of her hands moved gently along its back. Her fingers passed over the thin limbs as if soothing a frightened child. The creature made a sound. It was small and broken. Not human, but not empty either. It sounded weak, hungry, afraid. Something inside me shifted. Not fear. Recognition. My wife raised her head and looked at me. There was no shame in her eyes. There was no panic. She looked tired, but she also looked more present than she had in months. For the first time since the attack, she seemed fully inside her own body. She did not try to hide the creature. She adjusted it gently in her arms so I could see it better. As she moved, I noticed something behind her. The wooden crib had been removed from its box. I had never opened it. Somehow, she had built it herself. Blankets had been placed inside, along with small pieces of cloth and several of her old shirts. The crib stood against the wall, where we had once planned to place it. That was when I understood. We had believed everything was lost that Tuesday. We had believed the attack had taken our entire future. But something had remained. Something had grown in the darkness. Something had found a way to survive. Maybe it had been part of the child we lost. Maybe grief had shaped it. Maybe something had heard her crying in that empty room and answered. I did not know. I did not care. The creature released its feeding tube from her neck. A small drop of blood ran down her skin. It turned its unfinished head toward me. Though it had no eyes, I felt it looking at me. One of its thin limbs reached outward, not attacking. Reaching, my wife smiled. It was the same smile she had worn years ago when she showed me the positive pregnancy test. The creature made another soft sound. This time, I heard something inside it. Need, trust, life. My wife looked down at it, then back at me. Her voice was weak, but clear. What shall we name our child? I stepped into the room and closed the door behind me. I was not losing her anymore. We had not lost everything. We finally had a family. And I could become the father I had always wanted to be. Story 3. The moving van groaned like a wounded animal as it climbed the narrow road and turned into the gravel driveway of 14 Blackwood Lane. Its engine coughed. The tires crushed loose stones, and a cloud of pale dust rose behind it before slowly settling over the dead grass. To 12-year-old Tabitha, the sound felt like the perfect anthem for her life. Everything familiar was now behind her. Her best friends were 12 hours away. Her school, her favorite coffee shop, the crowded park near their apartment, and the noisy street where she had spent almost every day of her childhood were all gone. Even the small bedroom she had complained about for years suddenly seemed wonderful now that she would never sleep in it again. Ahead of her stood an old Victorian house that looked as if it had been waiting for them in silence. The house was tall, narrow, and badly worn. Dark green ivy covered most of the outer walls, wrapping around the windows and climbing toward the roof like hundreds of thin fingers. The porch leaned slightly to one side. Several wooden steps were cracked, and the front door was painted a faded black that had begun to peel away in long strips. A layer of gray mist hung around the property, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. Beyond the house, the woods stretched across the horizon like a solid wall. New beginnings, Tabitha. Her father called cheerfully as he climbed out of the van. John tried to sound excited, but even he looked tired after the long drive. His shirt was damp with sweat, dark circles sat under his eyes, and his hair had been flattened on one side from resting against the window. Tabitha climbed out without answering. Her mother came around the other side of the van and placed a hand on her shoulder. It has character, honey, Susan said. You'll see. Once we clean it up and put our things inside, it will feel like home. Tabitha stared at the crooked porch. She did not care about character. She cared that her phone had no signal. She cared that there were no houses close enough to see clearly. She cared that the air smelled like wet soil, old leaves, and something sour that reminded her of fruit left too long in a closed refrigerator. Most of all, she cared that her parents had made the decision without her. John had accepted a new job in a small town called Bell's Crossing. According to him, it was a great opportunity. The pay was better, the hours were shorter, and the company had helped them buy the old house at a price they could afford. Tabitha had listened to all of those explanations before. None of them had changed the fact that she had been forced to leave everything she loved. Come on, John said. Help us carry in the small boxes. We'll order pizza when we're done. From where? Tabitha asked. There isn't anything around here. There's a town 15 minutes away. That's not close. It's closer than 12 hours. Tabitha gave him a hard look, but John had already turned away. Her parents began the long and exhausting process of unloading the van. Boxes filled with dishes, clothes, books, old photographs, and kitchen supplies were carried into the house. The movers struggled with the heavy furniture, while John tried to tell them where everything should go. Tabitha carried 2 boxes into the living room, then quietly slipped away before anyone could give her another job. She walked around the side of the house and entered the backyard. The grass reached almost to her waist. It moved slowly in the wind, bending in wide waves like the surface of dark water. Broken garden tools lay near a collapsing wooden shed. A rusted swing hung from the branch of an enormous oak tree, turning slightly, even though the air had become still. At the far end of the property, the lawn ended and the woods began. The trees stood close together. Their trunks were black with moisture, and their branches formed a thick ceiling that blocked most of the daylight. Ferns and thorny bushes crowded the ground between them. Tabitha took a few steps closer. That was when she saw the path. It began at the edge of the grass and disappeared between 2 old trees. At first, it looked like a deer trail, narrow and partly hidden by weeds. But the closer she came, the stranger it seemed. The dirt had been pressed flat and hard. It was almost smooth enough to shine. There were no weeds growing in the middle of it, no fallen branches, and no animal tracks. The path twisted between the trees in a way that made it impossible to see more than 20 or 30 feet ahead. The trees on either side leaned inward, forming a dark tunnel. Tabitha felt something stir inside her. It was not exactly fear. It was curiosity, sharp and sudden. The path seemed to invite her forward. It looked like a secret meant only for her, something hidden from the rest of the world. She stepped closer until the toes of her sneakers reached the hard dirt. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, little girl." Tabitha jumped and let out a short scream. She turned quickly. A man stood beside the rusted wire fence, separating their property from the next one. She had not heard him approach. He was tall and painfully thin, with narrow shoulders and long arms. Dirty overalls hung loosely from his body. His skin was pale and rough, and his face looked as if it had been carved from old gray wood. His eyes were too large for his thin face. He watched her without blinking. "I'm Bill," he said. His voice sounded dry and rough, like stones rubbing together. Tabitha backed away from the woods. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I live next door." He raised one hand and pointed toward a small house partly hidden behind a line of dead bushes. Tabitha had not noticed it before. At that moment, John and Susan came running around the side of the house. They must have heard Tabitha scream. "Is everything okay?" John asked. He stepped between Tabitha and the fence and placed a protective arm around her shoulders. "Everything's fine," Bill said. "I only stopped the girl from wandering into the woods." Susan looked toward the path. "She wasn't going in," she said. Bill wiped his hands on the front of his overalls. "Maybe not yet." John's expression tightened. "What does that mean?" Bill looked at the dark opening between the trees. "This trail has a history." Susan gave a nervous smile. "A history? It's only a deer path, isn't it?" Bill slowly shook his head. "No, deer don't use that trail." Tabitha looked down at the dirt again. She had not realized until then how strange it was that there were no hoof prints. Bill moved closer to the fence. 20 years ago, a boy named Oscar lived in this house. John glanced toward the Victorian home behind them. Our house? Bill nodded. Oscar was about 13, maybe 14, small for his age. Quiet boy, kept mostly to himself. His gaze remained fixed on the woods. His parents were cruel people, the kind who shouted all night and drank all day. Everyone around here knew what was happening, but people did less about those things back then. They minded their own business. Susan's face became serious. What happened to him? One night, Oscar had enough. I was sitting on my porch when I saw him run out the back door. He didn't have a coat, didn't have a bag. He just ran across the yard and went straight down that trail. Bill lifted one thin finger. I watched him disappear between those trees. Tabitha suddenly became aware of how quiet the woods were. No birds called from the branches. No insects buzzed over the grass. Even the wind seemed to avoid the path. His parents called the police the next morning. Bill continued. Search teams came. They brought dogs, volunteers, and men who knew these woods better than anyone. And they didn't find him? John asked. Bill looked directly at Tabitha. They never found anything. No footprints, no torn clothes, no blood, no body. The dogs refused to follow the trail. They would get close to the entrance, lower their heads, and start crying. Susan folded her arms. There must be a reasonable explanation. There are always reasonable explanations until something happens to you. John shifted his weight. What exactly are you warning us about? Bill leaned over the fence. His voice dropped into a whisper. The old people around here call it the deer trail. According to the story, once someone walks far enough down that path, they leave the real world behind. Tabitha swallowed. What happens to them? She asked. Bill's large eyes settled on her. They don't come back. He let the silence remain between them before continuing. The woods keep whatever they catch. The air seemed to grow colder. Tabitha looked at the trail again. The darkness between the trees now appeared deeper than before, almost solid. That's quite a story, Susan said, though her face had become pale. She took Tabitha firmly by the arm. We have work to do. As they walked back toward the house, Susan stopped and turned Tabitha to face her. Listen to me. I don't care whether that story is true or not. We don't know these woods. There could be wild animals, deep holes, hunters, or dangerous plants back there. I wasn't going in. You were standing at the entrance. I was only looking. Then you can look from the yard. Susan tightened her grip slightly. Do not go near that path again. Stay on the lawn. Promise me. Tabitha glanced over her shoulder. Bill was still standing at the fence. He had not moved. He was watching her. Behind him, the deer trail waited in silence. I promise, Mom, Tabitha said. She placed both hands behind her back and crossed her fingers tightly. That evening, the family ate pizza on the living room floor because the table had not been assembled. John talked about fixing the porch and turning the extra room upstairs into an office. Susan made plans for the kitchen and said they could plant flowers once the backyard was cleared. Tabitha barely listened. She kept thinking about Oscar. After dinner, she explored the upstairs hallway. The walls were covered with faded wallpaper, printed with tiny red flowers. Several floorboards creaked even when no one stepped on them. Her bedroom was at the back of the house, with a tall window overlooking the yard and the woods beyond it. While unpacking, she found scratches on the inside of the closet door. Most were only random lines, but near the bottom, Someone had carved a name into the wood. Oscar. Tabitha stared at it for a long time. She told herself it could have been anyone. Oscar was not such an unusual name. The house was old, and many families had probably lived there. Still, she did not tell her parents. When darkness fell, the woods disappeared completely. There were no streetlights, neighboring windows, or passing headlights. Beyond the glass was only a black shape pressing against the world. Tabitha lay in bed and tried to sleep. The country silence felt louder than city traffic. Every sound inside the house seemed clear and close. Pipes clicked behind the walls. Wood shifted beneath the floor. Something scratched across the roof and stopped directly above her room. She checked her phone again. Still no signal. Her friends had probably sent messages. They might already be talking about school starting without her. Maybe someone else had taken her seat at lunch. Maybe they would forget her faster than she expected. She turned onto her side and closed her eyes. Oscar's story continued to beat inside her thoughts. He had run away from a life he hated. He had entered the woods and vanished from the world, never returned to the real world. To Tabitha, it sounded less like a warning and more like a challenge. Part of her understood that going outside would be foolish. Her mother had warned her. Bill had looked truly afraid. But another part of her wanted to prove that the adults were wrong. Maybe the path led to an old road or an abandoned cabin. Maybe Oscar had escaped and started a new life somewhere. Maybe Bill had created the story to scare children away from his property. Or maybe the path led somewhere impossible. The thought filled her with a strange excitement. At 2 a.m, Tabitha opened her eyes. The house was completely still. She sat up and listened. Her parents' bedroom door was closed. John's soft snoring traveled faintly down the hallway. Tabitha slipped out of bed. She did not put on her shoes. She did not take a flashlight or a jacket. She wore only a white silk nightgown that reached her knees. In the moonlight, her skin looked pale and smooth like carved marble. She stepped into the hallway and moved quietly down the stairs. Each floorboard seemed determined to betray her. She paused whenever the wood creaked, waiting to hear movement from her parents' room. Nothing happened. She crossed the kitchen, unlocked the back door, and stepped outside. Cold, damp grass touched her bare feet. Moisture soaked the bottom of her nightgown as she walked across the yard. The moon hung above the trees, thin and pale. The woods rose before her like a wall made of black glass. The deer trail was easy to find. Even in the darkness, the packed dirt seemed to carry a faint glow. It was not bright enough to light the trees, but it made the path stand out from everything around it. The color reminded Tabitha of sickly green water. She stopped at the entrance. For the first time, she considered turning back. The house stood behind her, its windows dark. It looked warmer and safer than it had during the day. Then an owl called from somewhere above her. The sudden sound made Tabitha jump. Her heart struck hard against her ribs. She almost screamed. For a moment, she expected a light to appear in her parents' bedroom. She expected the back door to open and her mother to call her name. The house remained silent. Tabitha turned toward the trail again. She felt something pulling her. It was not a hand or a voice, but a pressure in the air. The woods seemed to breathe inward, drawing her closer. Her fear remained, but curiosity pushed harder. She placed one bare foot on the packed dirt. The instant she crossed into the woods, the air changed. The temperature dropped. The smell of wet leaves became stronger. Thick branches twisted above her, blocking most of the moonlight. She took another step, then another. Soon the yard disappeared behind the first bend. The trail became a narrow tunnel between thorns, roots, and ancient bark. Some trees were so wide that 3 adults could not have joined hands around them. Their trunks were covered in dark knots that looked like closed eyes. Tabitha walked carefully. Small stones cut into her feet. Thorny branches pulled at her nightgown. Once, something moved through the bushes beside her. But when she stopped, the sound stopped too. She told herself it was a rabbit. The farther she walked, the more the night changed. First, the crickets went quiet. Then the wind disappeared. The branches stopped moving, but the leaves continued to whisper above her as though someone was crawling through them. Tabitha turned around. She expected to see the path leading back toward the house. Instead, there was only darkness. The trail behind her curved in a direction she did not remember. She should have been frightened enough to run home, but the strange pull had grown stronger. It pressed against her chest and guided her deeper into the woods. All she could hear was the steady pounding of her heart and the soft sound of silk brushing against her legs. She walked for what felt like an hour. That was impossible. The property was not large. She should have reached the other side of the woods or crossed a road. Instead, the trail continued without end. The trees began to change. They grew taller and thinner. Their branches curved downward like long arms reaching for her. Some roots rose out of the ground in shapes that resembled ribs and fingers. The moon appeared in places where it should not have been. Sometimes Tabitha saw it on her left. A few minutes later, it hung directly ahead of her. Then it appeared behind her, though she had never turned around. Her feet began to hurt. She stopped and looked down. Small cuts covered her soles, and thin lines of blood marked the dirt. A cold feeling entered her stomach. She finally understood that something was wrong. "I'm going back," she whispered. Her voice sounded weak and distant. Tabitha turned around and began walking quickly. The path behind her looked unfamiliar. The trees seemed closer together, and the shadows between them had become darker. She walked faster. After several minutes, she reached a large tree with 2 broken branches. She remembered passing it earlier. Relief rose inside her. Then she noticed the blood on the ground. Her own bloody footprints approached the tree from the opposite direction. She had walked in a circle. Tabitha stared at the marks. That's impossible. A smell drifted through the air. At first, it was weak. She thought it was rust or dirty water. Then, it became stronger. Copper, blood, raw meat. The scent was so thick that she could taste it on her tongue. Tabitha covered her nose and backed away, but the path curved toward the smell. Somewhere ahead, something wet tore with a soft, ripping sound. Tabitha stood perfectly still. The sound came again. Rip, chew, crack. Every part of her body told her to run, but her legs would not move. Slowly, she approached the bend. The trail opened into a small clearing filled with pale moonlight. 10 feet away, a nightmare crouched over a bloody shape on the ground. At first, Tabitha thought it was a huge deer. Then, it shifted, and she saw the body beneath the antlers. The creature was nearly 8 feet tall, even while crouching. It had the shape of a man, but its gray skin was stretched tightly over muscles that seemed to grow in the wrong places. Its shoulders were too wide, and its arms hung almost to the ground. Its legs bent backward at the knees. At the end of each leg was a black cloven hoof. A massive rack of antlers grew from its head. They were uneven, jagged, and covered with moss. Dark pieces of dried flesh clung to some of the sharp points. The creature was eating a golden retriever. Tabitha had seen a missing dog poster attached to a telephone pole near Bill's house earlier that evening. She recognized the animal's red collar. The creature held the dog down with one long hand. Its fingers were almost human, but each ended in a curved black claw. It pulled a strip of flesh from the animal and lowered its face to feed. Tabitha's stomach twisted. She tried to step backward. Her heel landed on a dry branch. The twig cracked beneath her foot. The creature stopped moving. For several seconds, the clearing remained completely silent. Then its head began to turn. The neck twisted slowly, while the body remained facing the dead dog. Bones clicked and snapped beneath the skin. The head rotated farther than any living neck should have allowed, until the creature was looking directly behind itself. Tabitha saw its face. It was not fully the face of a deer. The snout was long and the eyes were black and lidless, but traces of a human face remained beneath the animal shape. The cheeks, the eyebrows, and the line of the jaw still belonged to a boy. Around its neck hung a mud-covered cord. A small silver locket rested against its filthy chest. It looked like something a frightened child might carry to remember a mother who had never loved him properly. Tabitha's breath caught. "Oscar?" she whispered. The creature's black eyes widened. For a moment, something changed in its face. A flicker of human pain appeared there, weak and distant, like a light seen at the bottom of deep water. Then it opened its mouth. A sound burst from its throat. It began as a whistle and rose into a terrible human scream. The dead dog dropped from its hands. Oscar rose to his full height. His antlers scraped through the branches above him. Pieces of bark and moss fell around his shoulders. Tabitha turned and ran. She rushed down the trail without looking back. Branches whipped across her face. Thorns caught her nightgown and tore the silk. Sharp stones sliced deeper into her feet, but she barely felt the pain. Behind her came the clicking sound of hooves. Clack, clack, clack. The creature was following her. Tabitha ran until her lungs burned and her chest felt ready to split open. She expected Oscar to catch her at any moment, but the hoofbeats remained at a distance. He was not trying to catch her. He was guiding her. Whenever she turned toward a side opening or tried to leave the trail, the hoofbeats moved closer. A whistle sounded from the darkness, forcing her back onto the hard-packed dirt. Oscar was herding her deeper into the woods. Tabitha began to cry. "Mom!" She screamed. "Dad!" There was no answer. Once, she saw a warm yellow light through the trees. It looked exactly like the light above the back porch. She ran toward it. The path curved suddenly, and the light disappeared. A few minutes later, she saw the house again, but it stood on the wrong side of the trail. Its windows were bright, and she could see her mother moving inside the kitchen. "Mom." Tabitha left the path and pushed between the trees. The image of the house flattened like a picture on glass. It moved farther away no matter how fast she ran. Behind her, Oscar screamed. Tabitha stumbled back onto the trail. The house vanished. She ran through the darkness for the rest of the night, though morning never arrived inside the woods. At 14 Blackwood Lane, Susan woke shortly after sunrise and found the back door open. She called Tabitha's name. When there was no answer, she rushed upstairs and found the empty bed. John searched the house while Susan ran into the backyard barefoot. They shouted until their voices became rough. They called the police, neighbors, and every person in town who was willing to help. Bill stood beside the fence, staring at the trail. "You told her the story," John shouted at him. "You put this idea in her head." Bill did not argue. He only lowered his eyes and said, "I tried to warn her." Search teams entered the woods. They followed the deer trail, but it ended in a wall of thick briars only 50 yards from the yard. The bushes were so dense that no person could have passed through them without leaving torn clothing or blood. Police dogs refused to go near the trail. They lowered their bodies, pulled against their leashes, and whined. No one found Tabitha's footprints. No one found a piece of white silk. Weeks became months. John and Susan covered the town with posters. They spoke to reporters, hired private investigators, and searched every nearby road, river, cabin, and abandoned building. Tabitha was gone. The house at 14 Blackwood Lane never became a home. Susan could not remain in the place where her daughter had disappeared. John tried to stay for several months, believing Tabitha might return, but eventually he left too. The house stood empty for many years. 20 years passed in the real world. One autumn afternoon, a young couple came to view the property. The house was cheaper than anything else in the area. The porch sagged, the windows were cloudy, and ivy covered almost the entire front wall. Still, the man smiled as he stood in the backyard. "It has character," he said. His wife looked toward the woods. Deep between the trees, something white moved. It was gone so quickly that she assumed it was a bird. But inside the deer trail, in a fold of time where the same night had continued for 20 years, a woman ran through the shadows. It was Tabitha. She had grown older, but not in the way people were supposed to grow. Her white silk nightgown had become a gray, torn rag, fused to her skin by dirt, blood, and the strange power of the woods. Her hair hung in tangled ropes down her back. Her body was thin, but hard muscle moved beneath her pale skin. Her feet were no longer human. Her toes had fused together, and dark keratin covered them, forming the beginnings of cloven hooves. Tabitha stopped beside a tree and struggled to breathe. She reached up to push wet hair from her face. Her fingers brushed something hard near her temple. A small antler, covered in soft velvet, had pushed through her skin. Far away, a whistle scream echoed between the trees. Tabitha closed her eyes. For 20 years, Oscar had hunted her, guided her, and kept her from reaching the edge of the woods. But he was no longer simply hunting her. He was teaching her. He was the leader of a pack that the deer trail had slowly created. Tabitha looked through the trees toward the backyard of 14 Blackwood Lane. The real world appeared bright and flat, like a movie playing on a screen she could not touch. She saw the young couple standing near the trail. She tried to call out. She wanted to warn them. She wanted to tell them to leave the property, burn the house, and never return. Her mouth opened, but no human words came. A low, broken bleat escaped her throat. The woman in the yard turned her head, but she saw nothing. Tabitha felt movement behind her. Oscar stood between the trees, his enormous antlers covered with fresh moss. His black eyes watched her patiently. Tabitha lowered her head. A new hunger twisted inside her stomach. Then she turned away from the bright world and disappeared into the darkness. The legend had never been only a frightening story. It was not a warning meant to protect curious children. It was a rule of nature. Once a person went through the deer trail, they could never return to the real world. And sooner or later, the woods changed everything they caught. Story 4. It was beautiful. Katie stared at the necklace in wonder, almost afraid to touch it. A thin golden chain rested against a small black velvet stand, and hanging from it were 2 tiny crystal wings. They shone with soft shades of blue, silver, and green whenever the evening light touched them. The wings looked almost alive, as if they had been taken from a dragonfly and covered in glass. She carefully slipped 2 fingers beneath the pendants and lifted them. The wings felt cool against her skin. Fine golden lines ran across their surface like tiny veins, rising slightly from the pale blue crystal. The work was so detailed that Katie could hardly believe it was being sold at a small street stall. "How much is it?" she asked. $15, the vendor replied. A toothpick moved between his lips as he spoke. His voice was rough, and he sounded like someone who had spent most of his life breathing dust and cold sea air. The man was tall and thin, but there was something strong about him. His arms were covered with dark marks from years in the sun, and the skin on his face looked dry and weathered. Large, round glasses rested on his long nose. Behind them were sharp gray blue eyes that seemed far more intelligent than his untidy clothes suggested. He reminded Katie of an old sailor she might have seen in a history book, though there was also something about him that made her think of a tired university professor. He looked like someone who had traveled across the world, survived storms, studied strange languages, and learned things that ordinary people were never meant to know. For a moment, Katie imagined asking him where the necklace had come from. Then she noticed the sadness in his eyes. It was not ordinary sadness. It looked heavier than that. It was the kind of expression worn by someone carrying a secret that had ruined his life. Katie quickly looked away and opened her purse. She pulled out her wallet and found 1 $5 bill. After that, she searched through the bottom of her purse for the rest. Coins, receipts, hair ties, and old candy wrappers moved beneath her fingers until she found a folded group of $1 bills. She counted them twice before handing the money to the vendor. The man accepted it slowly. For a second, he did not move. His eyes shifted from the money to Katie's face, then back to the necklace. His mouth opened slightly, as if he was about to tell her something important. Katie smiled politely. The man closed his mouth. Without another word, he removed the necklace from the velvet stand and placed it inside a small brown leather pouch. He pulled the drawstrings tight and held it out to her. Katie took the pouch and lowered it carefully into her purse. "Thank you," she said. "It's perfect." The vendor did not answer. Katie turned and walked away from the stall with a light step. She felt proud of herself. Cassie's birthday was tomorrow, and she had finally found a gift that felt special enough for her. Cassie loved anything that could fly. She collected model airplanes, read books about birds, and spent hours watching insects move through the garden. When they were younger, she had once told Katie that the saddest thing about being human was not having wings. Katie could already imagine Cassie's face when she opened the pouch. She would gasp. She might even scream. Then she would hug Katie and refuse to take the necklace off for the rest of the day. The thought made Katie smile. Behind her, the vendor stood beside his stall and watched her disappear into the crowd. The money remained in his hand. He looked down at the bills, and his fingers began to shake. Katie's happiness made the guilt inside him feel even worse. He had seen that same excitement before. He had watched children and parents purchase his items with bright smiles and hopeful eyes. Every time he had wanted to stop them, every time he had failed, he suddenly threw the money into the air. The bills scattered in the wind, spinning above the pavement before drifting between strangers' feet. Several people bent down to grab them, laughing at their sudden luck. The vendor did not care. He quickly began packing his things. He folded the cloth from the table, shoved the empty stands into a wooden box, and closed the stall as fast as he could. He needed to leave before the necklace completed its purpose. He could not bear to witness what came afterwards. The following afternoon, Katie stood on Cassie's front porch and pressed the doorbell. Her backpack hung from one shoulder. Inside it were a bag of chips, 2 cans of soda, a rolled-up sweater, and the leather pouch containing Cassie's gift. Katie smiled as she waited. She had spent most of the morning imagining the moment when Cassie would see the necklace. Each time she pictured it, she became even more certain that she had made the right choice. The front door opened. Cassie's mother smiled when she saw her. "Oh, Katie, you're just in time." "Hello, Mrs. Lee," Katie said cheerfully. "Cassie is upstairs working on another one of her projects." Mrs. Lee glanced over her shoulder, then leaned closer to Katie as though she were sharing a secret. "The cake is ready and the dining room is decorated, but we forgot a few things at the store." She stood straight again and placed her hands on her hips. "You wouldn't mind keeping the birthday girl company until we get back, would you?" "Of course not," Katie replied. Mrs. Lee stepped aside and let her enter. Cassie's father stood near a small table, searching for his car keys. When he found them, he looked up and smiled. "Hey, Katie, hello, Mr. Lee. You ready for Cassie's birthday?" Katie patted her full backpack. "I'm completely ready." Mr. Lee laughed. "We'll only be gone for a little while. Keep her busy until we return." "I will," Katie said, giving him a playful salute. Mrs. Lee called upstairs to tell Cassie that Katie had arrived. Then she and her husband left the house. Katie listened as the front door closed. A moment later, the sound of their car faded down the street. She headed upstairs and stopped outside Cassie's bedroom. After knocking twice, she heard her friend's voice. "Come in." Katie opened the door. Cassie's room looked exactly as it always did. Model aeroplanes rested on floating shelves along the left wall. Some were modern passenger planes, while others were old military aircraft. Several smaller models hung from the ceiling on thin strings, making it appear as if they were flying above the bed. On the other wall was a large framed picture showing different insects. Butterflies, beetles, moths, bees, and dragonflies had been carefully drawn and labeled beneath the glass. Cassie sat at her desk near the window. Warm afternoon sunlight poured across the room and surrounded her in a golden glow. "Hey, Cassie," Katie said. "It's me." Cassie placed something down and turned in her chair. When she saw Katie, she smiled widely and opened her arms. Katie crossed the room and hugged her. "Happy early birthday," she said. "Thank you." They pulled apart, and Katie nodded towards the desk. "Working on something new?" "Yeah, it's a little different this time." Katie removed her backpack and walked closer. Several small trays were spread across the desk. Each one was filled with colorful beads. Thin pieces of clear cord rested beside them, along with scissors, pliers, and small wire cutters. In the center of the desk lay a half-finished beaded necklace. "Wow," Katie said. "That's really pretty." Cassie smiled proudly. "It had better be. I've been working on it forever." She rolled her chair back slightly. Katie suddenly remembered the pouch in her backpack. "That reminds me," she said. "I have something for you." Cassie's face brightened. Katie reached into her bag, moved the chips aside, and pulled out the leather pouch. "This is your birthday gift." Cassie accepted it with both hands. She examined the pouch for a moment before gently pulling the strings apart. Her fingers slipped inside, and she slowly drew out the golden necklace. The crystal wings caught the sunlight immediately. Blue, green, and silver light moved across Cassie's face. Her mouth fell open. "Katie," she whispered. Katie waited, already feeling joy rising inside her. "Oh my gosh," Cassie said. "This is incredible." Katie grinned. "Happy birthday." Cassie held the necklace close to her face. Her eyes moved over every golden line and every shining part of the wings. "This is beautiful. Where did you find it?" Katie lifted one finger and moved it from side to side. "That is a secret." Cassie rolled her eyes, though she continued smiling. She stood and walked towards the mirror on her vanity. Carefully, she placed the necklace around her neck and connected the clasp. The golden chain rested neatly against her skin. The twin crystal wings lay just below her collarbone. Cassie turned slightly from side to side, watching the colors change in the mirror. She touched the chain and adjusted it so the clasp was directly behind her neck. Then, she stroked the two wing pendants. "They look real," she said softly. Katie stood behind her, smiling at their reflections. "They suit you." Cassie looked at Katie through the mirror. "Thank you. Seriously, I love it." For the next several minutes, the girls talked about everything that seemed important to them. They discussed Cassie's birthday plans, their teachers, homework, boys they liked, boys they disliked, and what they wanted to do during the next school holiday. Cassie sat backwards in her office chair, with her legs on either side of the seat and her chin resting against the top of the backrest. She slowly moved from side to side as she spoke. Katie sat on the bed, leaning against a large pile of stuffed animals. She opened a bag of chips and began eating. Every few seconds, a loud crunch filled the room. Katie held the bag towards Cassie. "Want some?" Cassie shook her head. She had lifted the crystal wings again and was staring at them. Her chair slowly stopped moving. "I wish I could fly," she said. Katie ate another chip. "I know," she replied through the crunching. "That's why I bought the necklace. Now you have your own little pair of wings." Cassie smiled. She sat upright and released the pendants. The wings dropped against her chest. "So, when are we going to?" She stopped. A strange buzzing noise had filled the room. Cassie looked towards the open window. At first, she thought a fly or bee had entered. She searched the curtains, the ceiling, and the space around her desk. The buzzing grew louder. "Katie?" she asked. Katie did not answer. Cassie turned towards the bed. Katie was staring at her with wide eyes. A chip was frozen halfway to her mouth. "Cassie," Katie whispered. "Look." She slowly pointed towards the necklace. Cassie lowered her gaze. The two crystal wings were no longer resting against her chest. They were floating. The golden chain hung between them while the wings moved so quickly that they became almost invisible. Light flashed across their surface as they beat through the air. Cassie stopped breathing. Katie dropped the chip. It struck the carpet and bounced once. Neither girl moved. The wings slowly rose in front of Cassie's face. The chain still circled her neck, but the pendants now hovered in the air like a living insect. "This isn't possible," Cassie whispered. Suddenly, The wings shot forward. The chain pulled tight. Cassie screamed as she was dragged out of her chair. The wheels caught against the carpet, and the chair tipped sideways. Cassie hit the floor hard. Before she could recover, the wings changed direction and pulled her across the room. Katie jumped up from the bed. Cassie kicked wildly, trying to press her shoes against the carpet, the bed, or anything else that might stop her. Her hands grabbed the chain and pulled it away from her throat. Katie. She cried, "Help me." Katie remained frozen for one terrible second. Her mind could not understand what she was seeing. A necklace was flying around the room and dragging her friend behind it. It looked impossible, like something from a dream. Then Cassie slammed into the side of her desk. The sound broke Katie's shock. "I'm coming," she shouted. She rushed forward, but the wings lifted Cassie into the air. Cassie swung sideways and crashed into the left wall. Several model airplanes fell from the shelves. Plastic wings and small wheels scattered across the floor. The impact forced the air from Cassie's lungs. She gasped, but before she could take another breath, the necklace pulled her across the room again. This time, she struck the large, framed picture of insects. The glass shattered behind her. Sharp pieces rained onto the floor, and the frame fell sideways. Cassie cried out as the wings moved behind her neck. One flew to each side of the clasp, pulling the golden chain tighter. The chain pressed into her throat. She clawed at it, leaving deep red scratches across her skin. Katie chased her, trying to grab her arms or legs. Every time she came close, the wings changed direction. The room became a disaster. Model planes lay broken on the floor. Beads rolled in every direction. The office chair had fallen onto its side. The broken frame rested beneath the window, while pieces of glass covered the carpet. Katie stepped backwards, tripped over her own backpack, and fell. She threw out her hands to protect her face. Her palms landed directly on the broken glass. Pain shot through both arms. Katie screamed. Several sharp pieces had entered her skin. Blood quickly filled her palms and dripped onto the carpet. For a moment, she could do nothing but stare at her hands in shock. Then, Cassie cried out again. Katie gritted her teeth and began pulling the largest pieces of glass from her palms. Each movement sent another wave of pain through her fingers. Across the room, Cassie was dragged over the desk. Trays of beads flew into the air. Tools, cords, and jewelry pieces scattered onto the floor. Cassie managed to get both feet beneath her. The wings suddenly paused. She dropped to her knees and pulled the chain away from her throat. Air rushed into her lungs, and she began coughing painfully. Her fingers moved quickly along the chain, searching for the clasp. She found it. Before she could open it, the wings flew towards the window. Cassie's eyes widened. No. The necklace dragged her across the floor and straight through the open window. Her upper body disappeared outside. She felt empty air beneath her, and fear struck her so strongly that her arms and legs moved without thought. Her hands caught both sides of the window frame. Her knees struck the wall, and her legs hooked against the windowsill. The wings continued pulling. The chain tightened again. Cassie could not breathe. Katie pulled the last large piece of glass from her right palm and looked up. Cassie was almost completely outside the second-floor window. Only her hands and legs kept her from being dragged into the open sky. Cassie. Katie ran towards her. The pain in her hands no longer mattered. Cassie's eyes were full of terror. Her face was turning red as she struggled to hold herself in place. Katie grabbed her friend's arms. Blood from her palms smeared across Cassie's skin. Katie planted her feet against the floor and pulled with all her strength. Cassie pulled too. For a few seconds, they began moving back into the room. Then the wings increased their force. The chain dug deeper into Cassie's throat. She felt her vision darkening at the edges. Her arms trembled, and her fingers began slipping against the wooden frame. She needed air. Every part of her body screamed for it. She looked towards Katie. Katie's eyes were closed, and her face was twisted with effort. Tears ran down her cheeks as she pulled. Cassie tried to say her name, but no sound came out. Katie's bloody grip slipped. She opened her eyes and moved her hands, searching for a better place to hold. Then she noticed Cassie's lips moving. "What?" Katie asked. Cassie mouthed the words again. Katie leaned closer. Cassie repeated them, slowly, forcing her mouth to form every sound. "The cutters. Use the cutters." Katie understood. Her eyes moved towards the mess covering the floor. The small wire cutters had been on Cassie's desk before everything was knocked down. Katie released one of Cassie's arms and dropped to her knees. She searched through the broken model parts, loose cords, beads, pieces of glass, and scattered tools. Her injured hands left wet red marks on everything she touched. "Where are they?" she whispered. Cassie's arms shook violently. Her sight became dimmer. The buzzing of the wings sounded distant, even though they were only inches from her head. Katie threw aside a plastic plane body. She pushed away several strings of beads. Her fingers struck the sharp edge of another glass piece, opening a fresh cut. She cried out, but continued searching. Then she saw the cutters beneath a small tray. Katie grabbed them. She rushed back to the window. Cassie's left hand slipped free. Her body dropped slightly, and the chain cut harder into her throat. Katie grabbed her arm with one bloody hand. "I've got you," she said. "I've got you." Cassie looked at the cutters and nodded desperately. With the final strength left in her body, she pulled herself closer. Katie wrapped the jaws of the wire cutters around the golden chain. She tightened her grip. Her hands were wet with blood, and she feared the tool would slip away. She held it as firmly as she could. "Come on," she whispered. She squeezed. There was a loud snap. For one hopeful moment, Katie smiled. Then she looked at the chain. It was still whole. The metal jaws of the cutters had broken clean off. Katie stared at the useless handles in her hand. The broken metal shone in the afternoon sunlight. "No," she whispered. Cassie saw what had happened. The two girls looked at each other. Fear passed between them without words. Tears filled Cassie's bloodshot eyes. Katie shook her head as if refusing to accept the truth. No, 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 no. The wings suddenly moved apart. They began flying left and right, pulling the class back and forth behind Cassie's neck. At first, Katie did not understand. Then Cassie's body jerked. The chain was moving like a saw. It rubbed against her skin once, then again. Cassie's eyes opened wide. The golden chain cut through the surface of her throat. Blood appeared in a thin line. The wings moved faster. The chain sank deeper. Katie screamed. Blood ran down Cassie's neck and disappeared beneath the collar of her shirt. Katie threw away the broken cutters and grabbed both of Cassie's arms. "Cassie!" Hold on. Cassie could no longer hold the window frame. Her strength was gone. Her arms hung weakly as Katie tried to pull her inside alone. "Wake up," Katie cried. "Please, Cassie, help me." Cassie's head tilted backwards. Her face had grown pale. The wings continued moving from side to side. The chain cut deeper into flesh and muscle. Blood poured down the front of Cassie's shirt. It dropped from her clothes and fell onto the grass below, slowly forming a dark red pool. Katie pressed her feet against the wall beneath the window and leaned backwards. Every muscle in her body burned. Her injured hands throbbed, and fresh blood covered Cassie's arms. Still, Katie refused to let go. She closed her eyes. Tears ran freely down her face. The sound of the chain changed as it struck something harder. Bone, Katie heard it, but her mind pushed the sound away. Instead, she remembered sitting on the bed only minutes earlier. She remembered eating chips. She remembered Cassie smiling at the necklace. She remembered them talking about school, birthdays, boys, and the future. That moment now felt as if it had happened years ago. Katie continued pulling. Then, without warning, all resistance disappeared. She fell backwards onto the bedroom floor. Cassie's body fell on top of her. Somewhere outside, Katie heard a heavy object strike the grass. A soft, wet thud. Blood splashed across Katie's face. She closed her eyes. The room became strangely quiet. Outside the window, the golden necklace rose into the bright afternoon sky. The crystal wings moved quickly as it flew higher and higher. Drops of blood fell from the chain, shining red in the sunlight before disappearing into the garden below. The necklace turned west and flew away from the house. Katie lay on the floor beneath Cassie's body. She stared up at the ceiling. Several model airplanes still hung from thin strings above her. They moved gently in the air, turning slowly as if they were flying through an invisible wind. Katie thought they looked beautiful. She wrapped her arms around Cassie and held her close. "It's okay," she whispered. "Everything is going to be okay." Her hand moved gently across Cassie's back. "This is only a nightmare." Tears ran down the sides of Katie's face, cutting clean paths through the blood drying on her skin. Her palms burned with pain. Her blood mixed with Cassie's and spread across the back of her shirt. Katie continued stroking her friend's back. She refused to look towards the open window. She refused to think about the sound she had heard outside. "I'm going to wake up," she whispered. "Any moment now." Her lips shook. "And when I do, I'm going to throw away that stupid necklace." A car entered the driveway. Katie heard the engine stop. Doors opened and closed. A moment later, the front door swung open. "Katie," Cassie's mother called. "We're back." Shopping bags rustled downstairs. "How's the birthday girl doing?" Katie did not answer. She continued holding Cassie beneath the slowly turning model planes. Several miles away, Graham Waters pushed a wheelbarrow through a dark forest. The path was narrow and covered with loose stones, exposed roots, and dead leaves. Every few steps, one of the wheelbarrow's wheels struck a rock, forcing him to stop and adjust his grip. Sweat ran down his face. He paused to push his glasses higher on his nose. The forest around him was silent. No birds called from the trees. No insects moved in the leaves. Even the wind seemed unwilling to enter that place. Graham continued until he reached a large tree. The tree looked sick. Its bark was gray and split, and its branches were twisted like broken fingers. No leaves grew from it, even though the surrounding trees were green. Between its roots was a narrow hole. Graham parked the wheelbarrow beside it. He looked around, though he knew no one had followed him. Then he spoke a string of ancient words. He did not understand their meaning,